Well, well, well. Okay, so here we go. I was going to speed through the rest of this book, but then I kind of realized how much I love it again. And so we're gonna have to go through it word by word still. But I did want to, I totally forgot about this, but literally, like the first Valentine's Day, Danielle and I were together back in 2014. Thoreau actually came up all over again. We we started dating in December 2013, but our first Valentine's Day was February 2014, and so I get this Valentine's Day card in the mail from Danielle, and it says, "Will you be my Valentine?" on the front of it with a picture of a really old dead man. I'm like, "What are you trying to? You want him to be your Valentine?" Like, I don't get it. And then you open up the inside, it says, "I thoroughly hope so." And so the picture on the front was David or Henry David Thoreau. God, I don't know why I keep messing that up. Um, but it just goes to show, like, I this book has been consistent in my life for a long time, and it's just funny. I think I first would have read this book somewhere around like 2012, 2013, when I was back in my break room days up in the military. But just goes to show, like, this book has been in my consistent for a while. And yeah, going through the rest of this book, he's really Thoreau is such an interesting person because he doesn't really substantiate his claims. He's mostly just talking from his own subjective experience, and he's not trying to prove it. He's just trying to live his life deliberately. And yeah, and I think that really comes out. So, like, in the next few passages, in the next few chapters, he's talking about like the sounds of living at Walden in the forest, and the train that goes by, and how everyone marks their clocks by them, and how he can hear the carriages, horse-drawn carriages on the road that's a bit further away. And he even draws some diagrams, and he talks about like when he has to go into towns for supplies, and talks about like, and it's just like his day-to-day experiences. And like we're we're on page 72, and there's far more than 100 pages left. This will probably be my last session reading word for word, and then I'll probably speed through the rest, and then get on to the next book. But which, of course, the next book is going to be another Thoreau book, because he is his two books that are the most popular is Walden and then Civil Disobedience. And so, like, Civil Disobedience is notably his essay that's been used by Martin Luther King Jr. and I think also Gandhi as well, as like reinforcement of the ideas that we can rebel against our governments. What a timely essay that is! But just like kind of um, a civil provocation towards the government, that like we can do better, we can spur people on to do better, and like this civil disobedience is something he talks about quite extensively. And then I want to go into Emerson, and like specifically his essay on true friendship, and like what that looks like, just like kind of some interesting, unique ideas. But then, like, the mecca of like the book I really want to get to is obviously Plato's Republic. It's quintessentially the book on philosophy, and really a foundations for Western democracies in general. And so obviously we need to go there as well. It's not only to study in philosophy, but also in political science. And it's kind of the root of both. And Alan Bloom, the translation I have, he has a big interpretive essay in the back, which is probably what I'm going to read, because the book of Plato's Republic, well, it is like this quasi religious experience for like a lot of philosophers, people like who do like an undergrad in philosophy, because it's really the book that spurs people on to like philosophy in the first place. I don't. I think I'm gonna have to do like just reading the highlights or something, because it is quite lengthy. I think the book in total, with the book plus the essay, is somewhere around 700 pages. So that's going to take substantially longer than this 200 page-ish book that I've even skipped several parts of. So anyways, we'll go from there. But that's kind of the game plan for the next few sessions. So, but while we are confined to books through the most select and classic and read only particular written languages, which are themselves but dialects and provincial, we are in danger of forgetting the language which all things and events speak without metaphor, which alone is copious and standard. Much is published, but little printed. The rays which stream through the shutter will be no longer remembered when the shutter is wholly removed. No method nor discipline can supersede the necessity of being forever on the alert. What is a course of history or philosophy or poetry, no matter how well selected, of the best society, or the most admirable routine of life, compared with the discipline of looking always at what is to be seen? Will you be a reader, a student merely, or a seer? Read your fate, see what is before you, and walk into your futurity. 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 Sorry, one more note before we continue reading. Like this rugged individualism in America is like also wrapped up in like these pragmatic values in philosophy, and Thoreau 100% represents that as well. The fact that like in it's not working towards collectivism, it's not working towards like this grand notion of society. It's about going off on your own and doing it yourself. And I think it was William James that was the pragmatism guy, philosopher. But anyways, we'll get to him much, much later after. This is kind of like some precursory American literature before then diving back into the classics, and then we can start building back up from there to get back up to the present. It's like philosophy, political science, and the like are just like so wrapped up in so many big ideas. But this was really the book, especially the last chapter from yesterday, was really one of those chapters was like, oh, reading is the way to reading is one of the primary paths to enlightenment, and where you can actually like understand the ideas that people are talking about, engage with those ideas, and begin contributing some of your own. And it takes time. You have to understand these theories and work towards more. But I mean, we're not going to pull much more from. I just really like the way he phrases these things in the last half of this book, particularly these next couple chapters. Sorry. I did not read books the first summer. I hoed beans. Nay, I often did better than this. There were times when I could not afford to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment to any work, whether of the head or hands. I love a broad margin to my life. Sometimes in a summer morning, having taken my accustomed bath, I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise until noon, wrapped in a reverie amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around and fiddled noise throughout the house, until by the sun failing in my west window, or the noise of some traveler's wagon on the distant highway, I was reminded by the lapse of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been. They were not time subtracted from my life, but so much over and above my usual allowance. I realized what the Orientals meant by contemplation and forsaking of works. For the most part, I minded not how the hours went. The day advances as if to light some work of mine. It was morning, and lo, now it is evening, and nothing memorable is accomplished. Instead of singing like the birds, I silently smiled at my incessant good fortune. As my chuckle or suppressed warble might heed which he might hear out of my nest. My days were not days of the week, bearing the stamp of any heathen deity, nor were they minced into hours and fretted by the tickling of a clock. For I lived like the Puri Indians, of whom it is said that for yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they have only one word, and they express the variety of meaning by pointing backwards for yesterday, forward for tomorrow, and of meaning by pointing backward for and overhead for the passing day. This was sheer idleness to me, to my fellow townsmen, no doubt. But if the birds and flowers had tried me by their standard, I should not have been found wanting. A man must find his occasions in himself, it is true. The natural day is very calm, and will hardly reprove his indulgence. I had this advantage, at least in my mode of life, over those who were obliged to look abroad for amusement, to society and the theatre, that my life was become of my amusement, and never ceased to be novel. It was a drama of many scenes without an end. If it were always indeed getting our living and regulating our lives according to the last and best mode we have learned, we should never be troubled with ennui. I wonder if that's Aristotle. Eudaimonia is a book by Aristotle where he talks about like the pursuit of happiness, and I assume Thoreau would have read that. And I think this is a ennui, ennui, is a word similar to that, similar enough to that, where I wonder if that is what he's referring to, like this Greek word of like happiness. because it's not just happy, but it's just like this complete life that obviously Aristotle fleshes out in the whole book. Inuni. We should never be troubled with Inuni. Follow your genius closely enough, and it will not fail to show you a fresh prospect every hour. Housework was a pleasant pastime. When my floor was dirty, I rose early, and setting all my furniture out on the grass, bed and bedstead, but one making but one budget, dashed water on the floor and sprinkled white sand from my pond on it, and then with a broom scrubbed it clean and white, and by the time the villagers had broken their fast in the morning sun, had dried my house sufficiently to allow me to move in again, and my meditations were almost uninterrupted. It was pleasant to see my whole household effects out on the grass, making a little pile like a gypsy's pack, and my three-legged table from which I did not remove the books and pen and ink, standing amid the pines and hickories. They seemed glad to get out themselves, and as if wanting to be brought back in. I was sometimes tempted to stretch an awning over them and take my seat there. It was worth the while to see the sun shine on those things and hear the free wind blow on them. So much more interesting, most familiar objects look out the door in that house. A bird sits on the burrow, everlasting grows under the table, and blackberry vines run around its leg. Pine cones, chestnut burrs, and the strawberry leaves are strewn about. It looked as if the way these forms came to be transferred to our furniture, to tables, chairs, and bedsteads, because they once stood in their midst. My house was on the side of a hill, immediately on the edge of the larger wood. It was the midst of a young forest and pitch pines and hickories, and a half dozen rods from the pond, to which a narrow footpath led down the hill. In my front yard grew the strawberries, blackberries, and everlasting johnswort, and goldenrod, shrub oaks, and sand cherry, blueberry, and groundnut. Near the end of May, the sand cherry adorned the sides of the path with its delicate flowers, arranged in umbels cylindrically around its short stems, which last in the fall, way down with good size and handsome cherries, fell over in wreaths like rays on every side. I tasted them out of compliment to nature, though they were scarcely palatable. The stomach grew luxuriantly about the house, pushing up through the embankment which I had made, and growing 5 or 6 feet in its first season. Its broad, pinnate tropical leaf was pleasant through the strange to look on. The large buds, suddenly pushed out late in the spring from dry sticks which had seemed to be dead, developed themselves as if by magic into graceful green and tender burrows an inch in diameter, and sometimes as I sat at my window, so heedlessly did they grow and tax their weak joints, I heard a fresh and tender burrow suddenly fall like a fan to the ground, and there was not a breath of air stirring, broken off by its own weight. In August, these large masses of berries, which when in flower had attracted many wild bees, gradually assumed their bright, velvety crimson hue, and by their weight again bent down and broke the tender limbs. As I sat my window this summer afternoon, hawks are circling about my clearing. The tantivity of wild pigeons flying by twos or threes athwart my view or perching restless on my white pine boughs behind my house give a voice to the air. A fish hawk dimples the glassy surface of my pond and brings up a fish. A mink steals out of the marsh before my door and seizes the frog by the shore. A sedge is bending under the weight of the reed birds flitting hither and thither. And for the last half hour, I heard the rattle of railroad cars, now dying away and then reviving like the beat of a partridge, conveying travelers from Boston to the country, for I did not live so far, so out of the world as that boy, who, as I hear, was put out to a farmer in the east part of the town, but Erie long ran away and come home again, quite down at the heel and homesick. He had never seen such a dull and out of the way place. The folks were all gone off. Why, you couldn't even hear the whistle. I doubt if there's so much a place in Massachusetts now. Quote, in truth, our village has become a butt for one of those fleet railroad shafts, and o'er our peaceful plain is soothing sound, is concord. End quote. It's like, I guess he's putting little poems in here every now and again that he writes. The Fitchburg Railroad touches the pond about 100 rods south of where I dwell. I usually go to the village along its seaway, its causeway, and am, as it were, related to society by this link. The men on the freight trains who go over the length of the road bow to me as to an old acquaintance. They pass me so often, apparently they take me for an employee, and so I am. I too would be fain be a track repairer somewhere in the orbit of this earth. The whistle of the locomotive penetrates my wood summer and winter, sounds like the scream of a hawk sailing over the farmer's yard, informing me that many restless city merchants are arriving within the circle of town, or adventurous country traders from the other side. As I come under one horizon, they shout at their warning to get off the track to the other, heard sometimes through the circles of two towns. Here comes your groceries, country, your rations, countrymen. Nor is there any man so independent on his farm that he can say them nay. And here's your pay for them, screams the countryman's whistle. Timber, the long battering rams go 20 miles an hour against the city's walls, and chairs enough to seat all the weary and heavy laden that dwell within them. With such a huge and lumbering chivalry, the country hands a chair to the city. All the Indian huckleberry hills are stripped, all the cranberry meadows are wrecked up into the city. Up comes the cotton, down goes the woven cloth, up comes the silk, down goes the woolen, up comes the books, but down goes the wit that writes them. When I met the engine with its train of cars moving off with planetary motion, or rather like a comet, for the beholder knows not if the velo- for the beholder knows not if with the velocity and with the direction it will ever revisit this system, since its orbit does not look like returning curve, with its steam cloud like a banner streaming behind in golden and silver wreaths, like many a downy cloud which I have seen. Oh gosh. Sorry about that. Dropped my phone. Um, oh yes, we're on this page. Okay, sorry. Should I somehow change the page? Yeah. I have seen high in the heavens, unfolding its masses to the light, as if of a traveling demigod. This cloud compeller, who would ere long take the sunset sky for the livery of his train. When I hear the iron horse make the hills echo with his snort like thunder, shaking the earth with his feet and breathing fire and smoke from his nostrils. What kind of winged horse or fiery dragon will they put into the new mythology? I do not know. It seems as if the earth had got a race now worthy to inhabit it. If all were as it seems, and men made the elements their servants for noble ends, if the cloud that hangs over the engine were the precipitation of heroic deeds, and as beneficent as that which floats over the farmer's fields, then the elements and nature herself would cheerfully accompany men on their errands and be of their escort. I watch the passage of the morning cars with the same feeling I do with the rising sun, which is hardly more regular. Their train of clouds stretching far behind and rising higher and higher, going to heaven while the cars are moving to Boston, conceals the sun for a minute and casts my distant field into the shade. A celestial train, beside which the petty train of cars which hugs the earth, is but the barb of the spear. The stabler of the iron horse was up early this winter morning by the light of the stars amid the mountains, to fodder and harness his steed. Fire, too, was awakened thus early to put the vital heat in him and get him off. If the enterprise were as innocent as it is early, if the snow lies deep, they strap on his snowshoes and with giant plow the furrow from the mountains to the seaboard, in which the cars, like the following drill barrels, sprinkle all the restless men and floating merchandise in the country for seed. All day the fire steed flies over the country, stopping only that his master may rest, and I am awakened by his tramp and the defiant snort at midnight, when in some remote glen of the woods he funks the elements encased in ice and snow, and will reach his stall only with the morning star, to start once more on his travels without rest or slumber, or perchance at evening I hear him in the stable blowing off the superfluous energy of the day, that he may calm his nerves and cool his liver and brain for a few hours of iron slumber, if the enterprise were as heroic and commanding as it is protracted and unwearied. For though unfrequented woods on the confines of towns, where once only the hunter penetrated by day, in the darkest night dart these bright saloons without the knowledge of their inhabitants. The moment stopping at some brilliant station house in city or town, where a social crowd is gathered, the next in the dismal swamp, scaring the owl and fox. The startings and arrivals of the cars are now of epochs in the village day. They go and come with such regularity and precision that their whistle can be heard so far off that the farmers set their clocks by them, and thus one well-conducted institution regulates a whole country. Have not men improved somewhat in punctuality since the railroad was invented? Do they not talk and think faster in the depot than they did in the stage office? There is something electrifying in the atmosphere of the former place. I have been astonished at the miracles it has wrought, and that some of my neighbors, who I should have prophesied once for all would never get to Boston by so prompt a conveyance, are on hand when the bell rings to do things, quote, railroad fashion, end quote, is now the byword, and it is worth the while to be warned so often and so sincerely by any power to get it off its track. There's no stopping to read the riot act, no firing over the heads of the mob in this case. We have constructed a fate, an atropos, that never turns aside. Brackets, let that be the name of your engine, end quote, close brackets. Men are advertised at a certain hour and minute. These bolts will be shot towards particular points of the compass. Yet it infers with no man's business, and the children go to school on the other track. We live the steadier for it. We are all educated thus to be sons of Tell. The air is full of invisible bolts. Every path but your own is the path of fate. Keep on your own track then. What recommends commerce to me is its enterprise and bravery. It does not clasp its hand and pray to Jupiter. I see these men every day go about their business with more or less courage and content, doing more even than they suspect, and perchance better employed than they could have consciously devised, and perchance better employed than they could have perchance better employed than they could have consciously devised. I am less affected by their heroism, who stood up for half an hour in the front line at Buena Vista, than by steady and cheerful valor of the men who inhabit the snowplow for their winter quarters, who have not merely the 3 o'clock in the morning courage, when Bonaparte thought it was rarest, but whose courage does not go rest so early, who go to sleep only when the storm sleeps, nor the sinews of the iron steed are frozen. On this morning of the great snow, perchance, which is all raging and chilling men's blood, I hear the muffled tone of their engine bell from out of the fog bank of their chilled breath, which announces that the cars are coming. Without long delay, notwithstanding the veto of a New England northeast snowstorm, and I behold the plowman covered with the snow and rime, their heads peering above the mold board which is turning down the other daisies and nests of field mice, like brawlers of the Sierra Nevada, that occupy an outside place in the universe. Commerce is unexpectedly confident and serene, alert, adventurous, unwearied. It is very natural in its methods withdrawal, far more so than many fantastic enterprises and sentimental experiments, and hence its singular success. I am refreshed and expanded when the freight train rattles past me. I smell the stores which go dispensing their odors all the way from Long Wharf to Lake Champlain, reminding me of foreign parts, of coral reefs and Indian oceans, and tropical climes, and the extent of the globe. I feel more like a citizen of the world at the sight of the palm leaf, which will cover so many flaxen New England heads in the summer, the millennium hemp and the coconut husks, the old junk, the gunny bags, scrap iron, and rusty nails. This carload of torn sails is more legible and interesting now than if it would be wrought into paper and printed books. Who can write so graphically the history of the storms that have weathered as these rents have done? They are proof sheets which need no correction. Here goes lumber from Maine woods, which do not go out to sea in the last freshest risen $4 on the thousand because of what did go out or was sped up. Pine, spruce, cedar, first, second, third, and fourth qualities. So lately, all of one quality, to weave over the bear and moose and caribou. Next rolls Palmerston lime, a prime lot, which will get far among the hills before it gets slacked. These rags and balls and all of hues and qualities, the lowest condition to which cotton and linen descended, the final result of dress, the patterns which are no longer cried up, unless it is Milwaukee, those splendid articles, English, French, and American prints, ginghams, muslins, and see gathered from all quarters of the fashion and poverty, going to become paper of one color or a few shades only, on which, forsooth, will be written tales of real life, high and low, and founded on fact. This closed car smells of salt fish, the strong New England and commercial scent, reminding me of the Grand Banks and the fisheries. Who has not seen a salt fish thoroughly cured for this world, so that nothing can spoil it, and putting that preservation in the saint and the blood of the saints to the blush, with which you may sweep or pave the streets and split your kindlings, and the teamster shelter himself and his landings against the sun, wind, and rain behind it, and the trader, the Concord trader once did, hang it up by his door for a sign, which he commences business, until at last by his door for a sign when he commences business, until at last his oldest customer cannot tell surely whether it be animal, vegetable, or mineral, and yet it shall be as pure as a snowflake. And if it be put into a pot and boiled, will come out an excellent done fish for a Saturday's dinner. Next, Spanish hides, with the tails still preserving their twist and the angle of elevation which they had when the oxen that wore them were carrying over the pampas of the Spanish Main, a type of all obscenity, obstinacy. Okay, and evincing how the hopeless and incurable are all constitutional vices. I confess that, practically speaking, when I have learned of a man's real disposition, I have no hopes of changing it for the better or worse in his life's in this state of existence. Last paragraph. As the Orientals say, a curtail may be warmed and pressed and bound with the ligatures, and after a 12 years' labor bestowed upon it, still it will retain its natural form. The only effectual cure for its vitruces, as these tails exhibit, is to glue of them, which I believe is what is usually done with them, and then it will be put back and stuck. Here is a hogshead of a molasses or of brandy directed to John Smith, Cunningsville, Vermont, some trader among the Green Mountains, who imports for the farmers nearing his clearing, and now perchance stands over his bulkhead and thinks of the last arrivals on the coast, how they may affect the price for him, telling his customers this moment, as he has told them 20 times before this morning, that he expects some by the next train of prime quality. It is advertised in the Cunningsville Times. While these things go up, other things come down. Warned by the whizzing sound, I look up from my book and see some tall pine hewn on far northern hills, which was weighed. It's over the Green Mountains and the Connecticut, shot like an arrow through the township within 10 minutes, and scarce another eye beholds it going. Another poem. To be the mast of some great animal, admirable. To be the mast of some great admirable. AMMIRAL. Admiral? Okay. Sorry, that was not the end of the last paragraph. There is many more pages. just kind of speed reading through the last of this, talking about foxes on Sundays, distance evenings, cows. There's an he complains, oh, that I have never been born. Here, let's read that part. They are the spirits, the low spirits, and sorry, I skipped ahead. Yet I love to hear. Oh, he's talking about birds. They give me a new sense of the variety and capacity of that nature which is our common dwelling. Oh, that I have never been born. Sighs one on this side of the pond, and circles with the restlessness of despair to some new perch on the grey oaks. That then that I had never been born echoes another on the farther side of the tumultuous sincerity, and born comes faintly from the far in the Lincoln woods. Okay, interesting. Talking about owls. We're skipping ahead some more because it's Old English and boring. Okay, that's kind of the end of that chapter. Then he goes on to the next chapter, which is about solitude. I'm just going to kind of read some highlights from this, parts I've underlined already, just because we don't need to read about him talking about different animals in a forest, because we're not children. So yeah, about solitude. Okay, talking about animals as nature's watchmen. As it were, my own sun and moon and stars and of little world, all to myself. At night there was never a traveler passed by my house or knocked at my door more than if I were the first or last man, unless it was in the spring, when at long intervals some come from the village to fish for pouts. Skipping ahead. There can be no very black melancholy to him who lives in the midst of nature and has a sense of still. There was never yet such a storm, but it was Aeolian music. Oh, Aeolian music! To have a healthier and innocent ear. Nothing can rightly compel a simple and brave man to such vulgar sadness. I do remember this briefly, like when the Aeolian scales were discovered, it was just like condemned by the church, I think, for being too sad. And like people, like there was devil's music and some scales were forbidden by the church. And I'm not sure if it was the Aeolian scales or not, but I do know there's some history there and I'm just not entirely sure of it. But he talks about it. While I enjoy the friendship of the seasons, I trust that nothing can make life a burden to me. The gentle rain which waters my being and keep me in the house today is not dear and melancholy, but good for me too. Though it prevents my hoeing them, it is of far more worth than my hoeing. If it should continue so long as to cause the seeds to rot in the ground and destroy the potatoes in the lowlands, it would still be good for the grass on the uplands, and being good for the grass, it would be good for me. Sometimes when I compare myself to other men, it seems as if I were more favored by the gods than they. Beyond the deserts that I am conscious of, as if I had a warrant and surety at their hands which my fellows have not, and were especially guided and guarded. I do not flatter myself, but if it be possible, they flatter me. I have never felt lonesome or in the least oppressed by any sense of solitude, but once, and that was a few weeks after I came to the woods, when for an hour I doubted if the near neighborhood of man was not essential to the serene and healthy life. To be alone was something unpleasant, but I was at the same time conscious of a slight insanity in my mood, and seemed to foresee my recovery. In the midst of a gentle rain, while these thoughts prevailed, I was suddenly sensible of such sweet and beneficent society in nature, in the very pattering of the drops, and in every sound and sight in my house, in infinite and unaccountable friendliness at all once, like an atmosphere sustaining me, and made the fancied advantages of human neighborhood insignificant. And I have never thought of them since. Every little pine needle expanded and swelled with sympathy and befriended me. I was so distinctly made aware of the presence of something kindred to me, even in scenes which were accustomed to call wild and dreary, and also that the nearest blood The nearest of blood to me and humanist was not a person nor a villager, that I thought no place could ever be strange to me again. Another little poem. Mourning untimely consumes the sad. Mourning, as in sadness, untimely consumes the sad. Few are the days in the land of the living. Beautiful daughter of Toskar. Some of my unpleasant hours were during the long rainstorms in the spring or fall, which confined me to the house for the afternoon as well as the forenoon, soothed by their ceaseless roar and pelting, when an early twilight ushered in a long evening in which my thoughts had time to take root and unfold themselves. In those driving northeast rains, which tried the village houses too, when the maids stood ready with the mop and pail in their front entries to keep the dulge out, I sat behind my door in my little house, which was all entry, and thoroughly enjoyed its protection. In one heavy thunderstorm, the lightning struck a large patch pine across the pond, making a very conspicuous and perfectly regular spiral grow from top to bottom, an inch or more deep, and 4 or 5 inches wide, as you would groove a walking stick. I passed it again the other day and was struck with awe on looking at it and beholding that mark, now more distant than ever, where a terrific and restless bolt came down out of the harmless sky 8 years ago. This next part is all underlined. Men frequently say to me, I should think you would feel lonesome down there and want to be nearer to folks, rainy and snowy days, and nights especially. I am tempted to reply to such, the whole earth which we inhabit is but a point in space. How far apart, think you, dwell the two most distant inhabitants of yonder star, the breadth of whose disk cannot be appreciated by our instruments? Why should I feel lonely? Is not our planet in the Milky Way? This which you put seems to be, this is just so awkwardly worded. This which you put seems to me not to be the most important question. What sort of space is that which separates a man from his fellows and makes him solitary? I have found that no exertion of the legs can bring two minds much nearer to one another. What do we want most to dwell near to? Not to many men, surely. The depot, the post office, the bar room, the meeting house, the schoolhouse, the grocery, the Beacon Hill, or the 5 Points where most men congregate, but to the perennial source of life, whence, in all of our experience, we have found that to the issue. As the willow stands near the water and sends out its roots in that direction, this will vary with different natures, but this is the place where a wise man will dig his cellar. I, one evening, overtook one of my townsmen who has accumulated what is called a handsome property. Though I never got a fair view of it on the Walden road, driving a pair of cattle to market, who inquired of me how I could bring my mind to give up so many of my comforts of life, I answered that I was very sure I liked it passably well, and I was not joking. And so I went home to my bed and left him to pick away through the darkness and the mud to Brighton, or Brighttown, which place he would reach sometime in the morning. Any prospect of waking or coming to life to a dead man makes indifferent all times and places. The place where that many occur is always the same and indescribably pleasant to all our senses. For the most part, we allow only outlying and transient circumstances to make our occasions. They are, in fact, the cause of our distraction. Nearest to all things is that power which fashions their being. Next to us, the grandest laws are continuously being executed. Next to us is not the workman whom we have hired, with whom we love so well to talk, but the workman whose work we are. How vast and profound is the influence and subtle powers of heaven and of earth. We seek to perceive them. We do not see them. We seek to hear them, and we do not hear them. Identified with the substance of things, they cannot be separated from them. They cause that in that universe, men purify and sanctify their hearts and clothe themselves in their holiday garments to offer sacrifices and oblations to their ancestors. It is an ocean of subtle intelligences. It is an ocean of subtle intelligences. They are everywhere, above us, on our left, on our right. They environ us on all sides. We are the subjects of an experiment which is not a little interesting to me. Can we not do without society of our gossips a little while under these circumstances? Have our own thoughts to cheer us? Confucius truly says, virtue does not remain as an abandoned orphan. It must of necessity have neighbors. With thinking, we may be beside ourselves in a sane way. By a conscious effort of the mind, we can stand aloof from the actions and their consequences, and all things, good or bad, go by us like a torrent. We are not wholly involved in nature. I may be either the driftwood in the stream or Indra in the sky looking down on it, and may be affected by a theatrical exhibition on the one hand. On the other hand, I may not be affected by any actual event which appears to concern me much more. I only know myself as a human entity, the scene, so to speak, of thoughts and afflictions, and am sensible to certain doubtfulness. Oh, sorry. To certain doubleness by which I stand as remote from myself as from another. However immense my experience, I am conscious of the presence and criticism of a part of me, which, as it were, is not a part of me, but spectator, sharing no experience, by taking note of it, and that is no more I than is you. With the play, when the play, it may be the tragedy, of life is over, the spectator goes his way. It was kind of a fiction, a work of the imagination only. So far as he was concerned, the doubleness may easily make us poor neighbors and friends sometimes. I find it wholesome to be alone the greater part of time. To be in company, even with the best, is soon wearisome and dissipating. I love to be alone. I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude. We are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chamber. I'm going to read that again. We are, for the most part, more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our chambers. A man thinking or working is always alone. Let him be where he will. Solitude is not measured by the miles of space that intervene a man and his fellows. The really diligent student is one of the crowded hives of Cambridge College, is as solitary as a dervis in the desert. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone, at the mercy of his thoughts, but must be where he can, quote, see the folks, end quote, and recite as his and recite as is he thinks remunerate himself for his day's solitude, and hence he wonders how the student can sit alone in the house all night and most of the day without inuni and, quote, the blues. But he does not realize that the student, though in his house, is still at work in his field and chopping in his woods, as the farmer in his, and in turn seeks that same recreation and society that the latter does, though it may be more condensed form of it. Another paragraph underlined. Society is commonly too cheap. We meet at very short intervals, not having the time to acquire any new value for each other. We meet at meals 3 times a day and give each other a new taste of that old musty cheese that we are. We have had to agree on a certain set of rules called etiquette and politeness to make this frequent meeting tolerable, and that we need not come to open war. We meet at the post office and at the sociable and about the fireside every night. We live thick and are in each other's way and stumble over one another. And I think that we thus lose some respect for one another. Certainly less frequently would suffice for all important and heavy for all important and hearty communications. Consider the girls in a factory, never alone, hardly in their dreams. It would be better if they were but one inhabitant to a square mile, as where I live. The value of a man is not in his skin, that we should touch him. I have heard of a man lost in the woods and dying of famine and exhaustion at the foot of a tree, whose loneliness was relieved by the grotesque visions with which, owing to bodily weakness, his diseased imagination surrounded him, and which he believed to be real. So also, owing to his body and mental health and strength, we may be continually be cheered by a like but more normal and natural society, and come to know that we are never alone. I have a great deal of company in my house, especially in the morning when nobody calls. Let me suggest a few companions that someone may convey an idea of my situation. I am no more lonely than the loon in the pond that laughs so loud, or than Walden Pond itself. What company has that lonely lake, I pray, and that it is not the blue devils, but the blue angels in it. The azure tint of its water, the sun is alone, except in the thick weather, when there sometimes appears to be two, but one is a mocking sun. God is alone, but the devil, he is far from being alone. He sees a great deal of company. He is legion. I am no more lonely than a single mullein or dandelion in a pasture, or a bean leaf or sorrel, or a housefly or a humble bee. I am no more lonely than the mill brook, or a weathercock, or the north star, or the south wind, or the April shower, or a January thaw, or the first spider in a new house. I have occasional visits in the long winter evening, when the snow falls fast and the wind howls in the wood, from an old shelter in an original proprietor who is reported to have dug the Walden Pond and stoned it and fringed it with pine wood, who tells me stories of an old time with who tells me stories of old time and of new and eternity, and between us we managed to pass a cheerful evening with with social mirth and pleasant views of things, even without apples or cider. A most wise and humorous friend whom I love much, who keeps himself more secret than ever did Jeff or Wally, and though he is thought to be dead, none can show where he is buried. An elderly dame, too, dwells in my neighborhood, invisible to most persons, in whose odorous herb garden I love to stroll sometimes, gathering samples and listening to her fables, for she is a genius of unequaled fertility, and her memory runs back further than mythology, and she can tell me the original of every fable, and on what fact everyone is founded. Last page for this chapter. The incidents occurred when she was young. Already an old and lusty old dame who delights in all weathers and seniors. Sorry. Already and lusty old dame who delights in all weathers and seasons, and is likely to outlive all her children yet. That indescribable innocence and benefice of nature, of sun and wind and rain, and of summer and winter, such health, such cheer they afford forever, and such sympathy have they ever with our race, that all nature would be affected, and the sun's brightness fade, and the winds would sigh humanely, and the clouds rained hairs, and the woods shed their leaves and put on mourning and midsummer. If any man should ever for just cause grieve, shall I not have intelligence with the earth? Am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? What is the pill which will keep us well, serene, contented? Not my or thy great grandfathers, but our great grandmother. Nature's universal vegetable, botanical medicines, by which she has kept herself young, always outlived so many old pars in her day, and fed her health with their decaying fatness. For my, what the heck is going on? For my pancreas, instead of one of those quack vital, oh my goodness, for my pancreas, instead of one of those quack vials of mixture dipped from Archeon from the Dead Sea, which come out of those long, shallow, black sooner looking wagons, which we sometimes see made to carry bottles. Let me have a draught of undiluted morning air. Morning air. If men will not drink of this at the fountain head of the day, why then we must even bottle up some and sell it into the shops, for the benefit of those whom have lost their subscription ticket to morning time is in this world. But remember, it will not keep quite till noonday, even in the coolest cellar, but drive out the stopples, long ere that the fellow westward, the steps of Aurora. I am no worshipper of Hygeia, who was the daughter of that old herb doctor Asclepius, and who is represented on monuments holding a serpent in one hand, and the other a cup of which the serpent sometimes drinks, but rather of her, the cupbearer to Jupiter, who was the daughter of Juno, and wild lettuce, who had the power of restoring gods and men to the vigor of youth. She was probably the only thoroughly sound-conditioned, healthy, and robust young lady that had ever walked the globe. Wherever she came, it was spring. We're just about 50 minutes. Just going to look ahead briefly to see if we can... The next chapter is called Visitors. We're at page 90. There's a little more than 200 in the book. He's going to talk about... Okay, let's just read some of the... Oh, and we're batteries getting low too. 15%. We got lots of time. Okay, I'm just going to read... From here on, those are the two chapters I kind of really wanted to read. From here on, it's just kind of goes downhill. Like, it's less gravitating. Really, that second chapter is kind of peak Walden. And then it just kind of goes downhill. So I'll just kind of read out some quotes that I see throughout, and then maybe we can finish this today. I am naturally no hermit, but possibly sit out the sturdiest frequenter of the barroom, if my business called me thither. I have 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude and 2 for friendship, 3 for society. It kind of talks about how respectful and kind he is to visitors that come. He again talks about the Canadian woodchopper and a French Canadian that comes by who knows how to read, which is a rarity. He says, "By George," which I assume is referring to the king. By George, I can enjoy myself with enough here chopping. I want no better sport. Skipping ahead. Talking to the Frenchman, I asked him if he ever would like to write his thoughts. He said that he had read and written letters for those who could not, but he never tried to write his thoughts. Kind of a novel idea, writing your own thoughts down. Was not really the mood of the season, the cultural zeitgeist at the time. Cultural zeitgeist is where does that come from? It's like a German word for the times, like society, like changes, like how we're we'll get to that later. I forget who even talks about cultural zeitgeist and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of... It goes into the next chapter after that is the bean field. Now he's... So you remember how, like, in chapter 1 he was going through like his accounts and like doing his budget that we skipped over. Here he's talking about how much he's planted, how much they cost. Kind of going back to those roots. Next one is the village. Yeah, maybe I'll cut this off here, read ahead for the rest of the book, and then maybe I'll record that tomorrow, because that's about as far as I've gotten so far. So maybe I'll read the last 100 pages on my own, and then do one more episode where we could finish up this book, and then we can move on to civil disobedience and talk about Thoreau's other book. So thanks for tuning in. It's been fun. Maybe I'll actually turn the comments on this time and see how that goes. I just fully imagine people who don't know me directly from in-person communications will just shit all over my reading, but that'll be fine. We don't really care about what they think, right? Cool. Later. Oh, God.